Hi, welcome to part 44 on the Lackawanna Cutoff, where we're going to be talking about the Becker Farm Railroad, the miniature railroad in Roseland, New Jersey, also known as the Centerville and Southwestern. Hi, I'm Chuck Walsh, and I'm standing in a place that, if you were ever here when the railroad was in operation, until 1972, you would recognize it. It is unrecognizable today. I'm going to orient you, and we're going to, during the course of this video and a subsequent video, which will be 44A, which I'll explain why we're doing it in two parts, we'll talk about the history of the Centerville and Southwestern. Roseland at one time was Centerville, and then it became Roseland, but Centerville and Southwestern referred to the miniature railroad, which was built in 1938 originally by a young 18-year-old Gene Becker. So when does Gene Becker, if you know, when does he really become involved with the Centerville and Southwestern? Who actually builds it? Is it his father, or is, because I'm thinking 1938. How old would he have been?
It wasn't his father. It was his uncle, wasn't it?
Oh, it was his uncle.
No,
It wasn't his uncle.
it was. The dairy was called Henry Becker and Son. Henry Becker of Henry Becker and Son was this Becker's grandfather. The son was his father. The son, his name escapes me, but the father and Gene Becker, his name was Henry Eugene Becker, named after his grandfather, so everybody just called him Gene instead of calling him Henry, so it went by his middle name. Gene and his father were into live steam model railroad. They were members of the New Jersey Live Steamers. I imagine when Gene Becker was a young kid, they were members down there. And they just decided to take it a next step further, and instead of building 1.5" scale, they decided to build something 2" scale, which is what the CNS is. They started building this stuff, built the 1500 first. They had the 1501, the steam locomotive, which was a 484 Pocono. Had that built by, who was it? Ayers and
Henry Ayers.
It was two past presidents of, was it
Alco Locomotive.
Alco and Porter,
Yeah.
was it?
American Locomotive Company.
And
Yeah.
I think Porter.
H.K. Porter. Yeah.
Two retired presidents of the two major locomotive company builders built the 1501 steam engine. And they're the ones that decided on a Pocono because of the grades that were going to be at Becker Farm. They said they needed a Pocono.
Patterned after the Lackawanna Pocono type locomotive, too.
Because Becker's Creamy had one up in North Jersey, which was on the Lackawanna, so he shipped a lot of his milk on the Lackawanna Railroad, so that's why he went with a Lackawanna Pocono. But under the recommendations of these two past presidents, Becker originally wanted a Hudson, but they said it wasn't going to be big enough to pull the grades that he had, so that's why they went with a 484. So now I forget what the original question was.
Well, who actually? Well, where does Gene come into this picture in terms of?
So, like I said, they were the father and Gene. I imagine when Gene was a kid, they were members of the New Jersey Live Steamers, and they took it one step further and started building this 2" scale railroad, and probably didn't know when to stop, and they wound up with a bunch of track built, and it wasn't until 1948 when they decided to really open it up to the public and start taking people for rides. But when they started, the way I understand, when they started building the railroad in 1938, Gene would have been about 18 years old. And by that time, I think his father, Gene is the one who did all the engineering and stuff and all the all the figuring out and everything.
So it really, in a sense, was his railroad.
It was his railroad, Gene Becker.
Now, the reason why I'm here is when I was last here, which is now 35 years ago, in 1990, you could still see the abutments for the railroad. And I'm going to orient you exactly where that railroad was. But I think before even getting into those particulars, I think it's worth noting what a significant operation this really was. Yes, it was a miniature railroad, and it was, in a sense, maybe not a real railroad, but in some ways it was operated as if it were a real railroad. Now, there was a bridge here, and the abutments, I think you can see the concrete on it, but it looks like since I was here, it's been torn away. So, but it matches on this map where the bridge would have been. We'll show you that bridge. And in fact, in the opening video, you saw the train coming over that bridge. On that side of what is Fullerton Brook was referred to as Black Rock Brook, I think, in some maps that the dairy, the Becker Farm dairy, had. There was a yard over here for the miniature railroad and a turntable over here. Now, one question you might have before we go too far is, well, what relevance does this have to the Lackawanna cutoff? Other than the fact it's my channel, I can do whatever I want, but this miniature railroad, which I'll go through where it ran and the significant parts of it, but it was modeled after the Lackawanna Railroad Sussex branch. And in fact, Becker, or the Becker Farm, actually had a facility on the Sussex branch in a place called Strader's, a place that's really very close to where the Skylands Park, where the baseball team, the single-A baseball team plays up in, I guess it's Lafayette, up in that area off of Route 206. And in fact, the Sussex branch will die when that particular operation is closed in 1964. As a kid, the Becker Farm delivered milk to my house in South Orange and a number of places over time. But going back to 1938 and Gene Becker, he envisions a railroad starting from here, going across and going where there's buildings now at the campus here, but literally a trip that will eventually go as far as be 1 mile away on the farm. This was a huge farm. It was the largest parcel in the borough of Roseland, about 1,000 acres. But we're actually going to be doing some interviews on the other side of Route 280. Route 280 will come through at one point, and unfortunately is going to destroy the railroad, and the railroad will have to be rerouted. We'll go to another place where the railroad was rerouted to, and there's another bridge that was there, but we'll take it one bridge at a time here. So in 1938, the railroad is built from Centerville Yard, we'll call it, to a place called, at that point, Cumberland Junction. It'll become known as Peachtree Junction later on, but at that point it's Cumberland Junction. Cumberland Junction, in the model, if you're modeling, and this is what Mr. Becker was doing, that reflected Branchville on the Sussex branch. Now from here, there was a steep grade that went up to a place called Pigpen Siding. There was literally a pig pen off on the side. Right over here, on that side of the brook, would have been a farm stand where they sold chocolate milk, their famous chocolate milk, and vegetables during the summertime. It was a summertime operation. The 1938, they're not operating per se. It was basically a toy for a family that, that was not hurting. They were a fairly wealthy family that goes back several generations. It was actually Gene Becker's grandfather who established the dairy, Henry Becker as he was called. But in any case, so what was here was the yard, the bridge, a 3.5% grade going up, well, through the building where there was no building at that time. Pig pen grade, as they called it. And then the railroad continued on. We'll show you all this, to Horseshoe Curve, which is reflective of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and then went out into the plains, as they call it, curved around and went to Peachtree Junction. Now, 1950, they actually add a loop to Peachtree Junction so that a train didn't have to turn around on a Y, which they had there previously. In other words, the train had to go up, back, and then reverse its direction. Whereas after the loop was built, the train would just continue on. Now, in 1940, we go back a little bit, the railroad gets a steam locomotive built, number 1501. They had a really small diesel locomotive called 1500 at the time, when they started the operation. 1501 comes along in 1940. That locomotive will be in operation throughout the whole time that the railroad is here. And it's kind of reflective of the Lackawanna, because Becker himself, Gene Becker, referred to it as a Pocono, a 484 configuration. And such a locomotive would have run over the cutoff, no doubt. And in fact, the Sussex branch ran under the cutoff in Andover. So, you know, you could say, well, it's a stretch? Yeah, you know, in terms of the connection to the cutoff. But still, there's a definite connection to the Lackawanna. So what happens, when we get to the 1950s, and I believe in 1949, they first start opening to the public and actually charging a nominal fee. When I was a kid, it was, I think, 48 cents for an adult and 24 cents for a child. But a nominal fee, it was probably less than even that back in the 1950s. But thinking of what the 1950s were, that's really where the end of steam operation on railroads in the U.S. was happening. There was, by the mid-50s, basically everything is gone. But here you could still come back and ride behind a steam locomotive. And there were additional diesel locomotives that they added to their roster, 1502 and 1503. All of which still exist, by the way. But the problem is, as time goes on, and when we get into the 60s, I think there's still a lot of attraction here to this operation. Into the early 60s, they're still operating the dairy. You still get deliveries at your home. I remember, once again, the milk being delivered to my house. In 64, though, when the operation is sold to Alderney, all that changes. And I think as we go in through the 60s, there might be a lessening of interest in the railroad. And the problem is, the biggest problem is it's really a 1-2 punch really that happens to the railroad, which we'll talk about, is that in 1967, Route 280 is planned to go through here. Now that will sever the loop at Peachtree Junction, and what will happen is that there will have to be a rerouting, and this is at the expense of the Beckers to do this. They will reroute the railroad from Peachtree Junction over a 2-year period, and it will be looped back. Instead of going straight out to 280 and on the other side of 280, where we'll do some interviews, by the way. We're going to be showing you those. But instead, they have to literally loop back and create another loop at the end of the railroad for the trains to be able to turn around up the road a piece here. We're going to visit that spot as well to sort of show you what is left of that. There isn't much here. You have to really know where you're looking to be able to navigate over what is now a business campus that's, as I said, almost totally unrecognizable unless you know exactly where you're going. So what happens in 1967, the railroad stops basically at Peachtree Junction. They haven't built the new railroad looping down over here yet. That'll open in 1969. I know as a kid, I remember riding it. I remember of course, the old operation. I remember the interim operation, and I remember the new operation, I'll call it. The Beckers will spend about $500,000 to put that new trackage in. You probably could add a zero to that today. So it's a lot of money that was spent on this to keep this going. So the 280 coming through was the first punch. The second punch is really the knockout. And that's the borough of Roseland revokes the farmland assessment for this 1,000-acre farm. So now, instead of being assessed as farmland, it becomes assessed as residential property. So the Beckers, there's no way they can possibly run an operation when it's been rezoned on them. And there's, I think over time, been a lot of discussion as to what was behind that. Was it above board, or was there, I'll say, nefarious or illegal type of activities that took place that led to that money, passing under the table? Big real estate deal on a 1,000-acre parcel of land located right next to exit 5 on the newly built, or at that point be newly opened, Route 280. We don't know. We'll never be able to prove anything. That's, at this point, over 60 years ago. Anybody who was involved in it is dead now. But still, I know from what I understand, I never met Mr. Becker, by the way, but I understand that he had no use for the borough of Roseland, and I can understand that. So that basically, the revocation of the farmland assessment for the property basically causes Becker to close not only just the farm, but obviously the railroad as well. And its last day will be on Labor Day 1972. Now what happens after that is quite remarkable, because that could have been basically the end of the story. It is the end of the story for the most part here in Roseland. The 1501, the steam locomotive, is going to be sent out, donated to the Ford Museum out in Dearborn, Michigan. Unfortunately, we'll get into this, what happens to the locomotive after that, but it'll at least be preserved out there, even though there's no relevance to that location. But that was basically the best that Mr. Becker could do. There really wasn't any other place to send it. He wasn't going to donate it to the borough of Roseland. That hell would have frozen over before that would have happened. So what happens to the rest of the railroad? Well, the track, this operation was signaled. With sidings and other locomotives, as I've mentioned, and rolling stock. What happens to that? Well, after 1972, that's going to be put into storage. We're not going to go beyond really too far from 1972, because it's basically all of that is going to end up in Phillipsburg, and that's going to be part 44A, where we talk about the operation down in Phillipsburg, where everything that was here, except 1501, the steam locomotive, will go to Phillipsburg eventually. There will be an interim stop for almost 20 years in Middlesex County. We'll talk about that as well in 44A. But here, the operation ends, and then little by little, it's fortunately saved. But what happens to the property is that, well, it becomes a business campus, a big business campus. And really the only recognition for the most part of what was here is Becker Farm Road, which is off to my left, to your right. It's a token sort of recognition. So what we're going to do is going to show you some not only photos and video to kind of orient you. It's one thing for me to talk about and point to things, and you can't really tell anything now given the layout of this campus. So that'll be part, sort of in a sense, part one of what's coming after this. Then we're also going to go, and we're going to, as I mentioned before, go to some interviews that were done, including my videographer, by the way, Mike Herman, who actually rode this train back in the day. I mean, I remember quite fondly. And I think the reason why this has been preserved is because of how significant it was regarded as. So we'll go to the interviews, and then we're going to come back to close it off. And what I'm going to do, we're going to be over at what used to be called the High Bridge, was the Paradise Valley High Bridge, which is up the road a piece here. And that's the other really part of the operation. Now that's the 1972 operation, not the original operation, that we can get at. Peachtree Junction, I wish we could get to it. I can show you photos of when I was here in 1990. Unfortunately, because of the security issues and the company that it's on, a private parcel of land, I don't think we're going to risk that we're going to get thrown out by security. But I think we can do it justice by basically showing you what it looked like, and, well, pretty much what it does look like, because we do have some modern photos of that as well, for me and others. So let's go now to, we're going to start showing you what was here. We'll talk about what was here, and then we'll come back and we'll close it out over at, well, the High Bridge at Paradise Valley. So here is the map of the Centerville and Southwestern Railroad. You're going to see this and variations of it throughout this video. Just to orient you, the things we're going to see, we're going to be seeing film, 8mm film that my father took in 1962 and 63, maybe 64. And the different sites that he captured will include the station area, the yard at Centerville, pig pen, grade, horseshoe curve, the plains, the long fill and Peachtree Junction, and also the loop. So here we go. Here's those films that were taken by my dad. Ticket office at Centerville. Here's the station right next to it. Just on the other side is the yard. 1501 here has just come off of the turntable. It's not the train that I'm riding at this point, but it will be the train they'll be riding once it gets to the station to unload the passengers. It's got a full train going across the grade crossing at Centerville. And there I am, age 5. Seem to be enjoying myself, trying not to laugh. Yep, and my mom, who doesn't know my dad has her on camera. Wait until you can see her expression when she finds out. So here comes our train. My dad's moved up to Pigpen grade, and there it is, 1501, pulling us over Fullerton's Brook, coming up to the grade crossing. And you're going to see me in the middle of the second car, going up Pigpen grade. Pigpen is on the right, siding coming up. Now, here we're going back into the yard. My dad didn't come on the train, so therefore he only caught us going back and forth between there and the station. We're now on a different train, sitting on the siding at Pigpen siding, and here's the 1501 pulling that train, the other train, towards Centerville. Here we are going along. I want to say this is probably Horseshoe Curve. I'm not 100% certain. The next snippet definitely is Horseshoe Curve. So I'm thinking just because of the sequence that that's where we were. I'm very interested in what's going on. The sidings are especially interesting. That was plain siding, my mom. The long fill, you can see it curving around in the far distance. Here we're going on the western or southern leg of the Y at Peachtree Junction. We're going clockwise around the loop. What's confusing is that now we see film here from my dad going through the Black Forest of the loop counterclockwise. So it must be a different trip that he has captured here, two different trips that we're seeing here. And we're back at Pigpen siding, going back to the station at Centerville, 1501. Obviously, we have a diesel that's pulling us, heading down the siding, downgrade. I have an itchy nose. We head towards the station. Now we're going to look at a different map, although it's pretty much the same map, but you have the different colors, which let us know the different years of operation. When you saw me riding, that was the original operation, which would be green to red to white, those lines, that alignment. For the years 1967 and 1968, the trip from Centerville would have been via the green line to the red line, with the engine cutting off at the Y at Peachtree Junction and going either up the left or up the right and then across and back around the train and then basically pulling us back. I guess we must have been pulled backwards. I don't remember, but there wasn't sufficient trackage on the Y to Y the whole train, so I don't think that's the way it worked. And then in 1969, they went to the alignment, which was the green line, to the yellow line, which is the line that went down to Paradise Valley, which is on the new loop over there, which, as you can see, wasn't very far from the Centerville station. So that gives you an idea of how things worked during the lifetime of when the Centerville and Southwestern was at Roseland. And then there's the story of 1503, not 1500, by mistake, which you'll hear about later in the video. Okay, we're here on the original Centerville and Southwestern loop with an original signal in its proper place with a little bit of track as well. I have this gentleman here who's going to tell us a little bit about the history, which predates him, but his interest has certainly grown with, I guess, the knowledge that he's been able to obtain, such that people refer to you as an expert. Who are you? And quite frankly, yes, they do.
Well, I don't know if I'd call myself an expert. Hi, I'm Michael Lechicky. I am a member of the Phillipsburg Railroad Historians, who are custodians of the Centerville and Southwestern rolling stock today. And as Chuck sort of alluded, I know it's strange for someone born this side of 2000 to have such an interest in a miniature railroad that's been gone from the landscape for over 50 years. But how I found out about it, my parents and I were in Phillipsburg one day, and we were walking around and we saw these miniature tracks. And I'd never seen miniature railroad tracks before, and we looked at them and we said, "What is this?" So we showed up on an open house day, we rode the train, and kept coming back after that, and eventually they put us to work as volunteers. And then over COVID, didn't have much to do, so I started researching the Centerville and Southwestern and became aware of the incredible story of this highly unique miniature railroad, and I've become more and more fascinated with it ever since.
In all the time that you've been studying this or researching the railroad, is there anything in particular that impresses you about it? As a person who never was here per se when it was in operation, but in looking back and what you've heard from others or what you've seen in documents and such, what kind of strikes you as being, I would say unique, but something that you would think is something remarkable about it?
Two things.
Okay.
The first is that the Centerville and Southwestern really is one of the pioneer grand-scale railroads in the United States. It was conceived in the 1930s, and not a lot of people were doing this. You know, the live steam hobby of miniature railroads exists today, but it didn't really come into maturity until the 1950s, I think. The CNS was really a pioneer. So that's one thing. And a lot of modern day live steamers were inspired by visiting the CNS to create their own railroads. I know several railroads that were directly inspired by the Centerville and Southwestern. But the second thing I'd say is that this was run as though it were a real railroad. And in 1953, John T. Cunningham came to the Centerville and Southwestern, and he wrote an article about it for American Car and Foundry. And he said that the CNS was an education in railroading. And I think that's really one of the best statements that has ever been said about this railroad, because the crew were all paid. They all dressed in prototypical uniforms. They had prototypical hat badges. You had a 1-mile live steam railroad with steam and diesel and passing sidings and automatic block signals. And in every respect, they just ran this as though it were a real railroad. And so it was an interpretive experience before interpretive experiences were even really used in museum settings. I've prepared digital renderings of all the paint schemes that Becker ever had. I think there's about 20 of them. Keith and I have studied them. The service records for the railroad all still exist, so whenever the cars were painted, Becker made a note of that. And even down to the paint colors that were used. We know, like, Duco Admiralty Blue and Duco Pearl Gray is the classic blue with the stripes scheme. So we can be that specific with the paint colors that we choose.
That's quite amazing to think that all that still exists.
Yeah.
Which, of course, makes the job ultimately, I guess, a lot easier to know what was done. But that's... And to your point about it being a real railroad, if it had been in a sense, a real railroad, a full-scale railroad, that kind of documentation would exist as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Even the paint schemes themselves, if I may go on a slight tangent here.
Be my guest.
If you look at, which of course I've been doing, looking at the paint schemes from the 1940s to the 70s, Becker's trends of the paint schemes follow what was going on in prototype railroading at the time. So the boxcars and the reefers in the 40s and 50s, boxcar red, mustard yellow, classic sort of steam era colors. But then in the real world, in 1956, a very important thing happens in the railroad world, and that is the New Haven Railroad debuts a livery called the McGinnis livery. Very sharp geometric colors, bold colors, red, black, and white. Very big blocky lettering. And it was the first railroad in the United States, I think, big railroad, to go into those kind of paint schemes. And then you had things like New York Central's Century Green showed up. The railroads in New England had colorful paint schemes too, and Becker followed this. If you look at the paint schemes, they changed. They became a lot more loud, bright blue and green with big, bold lettering. And so, to the letter, Becker followed prototype trends with everything. And that's why, an education in railroading, it really was.
I don't know if they use Imran paint or not, or they. I know when I interviewed Mike Del Vecchio, it would have been last year, and he talked about a lot of that with the restoration of F units in Steamtown and such, that they were using Imran paint, which is a great paint, but it's very toxic. I don't know that you folks what Becker used. I don't know if
I don't know.
Imran's been around for a long time, but he may not have used that. But obviously the paint schemes have survived, probably helped by the fact that this equipment was not stored outside.
Yes. Well, it actually was.
It was.
The engines were stored in the roundhouse. The rolling stock stayed outdoors through spring and summer. It got rained on. Whenever it rained, it got rained on. We brought it inside for the winter, so there was no snow or ice damage.
But the locomotives were undercover. Okay, that would have helped with the paint.
The interesting thing is some of the cars were repainted as recently as 1971, and so they only saw a season of service before they went into indoor storage for 30 years until it was acquired by Phillipsburg. So those paint schemes are mint condition.
Interesting.
On some of the cars.
I did remember my original question, or it's more of a comment, but you can react to it any way you wish.
Okay.
Because it's years ago, and it might have been the same day I came over here in 1990, because I lived in South Orange at that time. And I remember going over to the Roseland library, and they had a file. They may still have one, but in those days, it was a physical file on the Becker Farm Railroad, or the Centerville and Southwestern. And I was going through and I was looking, you had the grade profile, but one of the things I saw in there, and I'd have to dig out my copy of it, because I think I made copies of it, is that there was a mention in there that the Centerville and Southwestern was considered to be, or was in a sense conceived by Becker as a model of the Lackawanna Sussex branch. I don't know if you ever heard that or not.
I've heard that only in secondhand sources. When they were first building the railroad in the 1940s, the names on the railroad were very different. You obviously have Horseshoe Curve, which of course is emulative of Horseshoe Curve in Altoona, or wherever Horseshoe Curve is.
Correct.
Then the Peachtree Junction was originally called Cumberland Junction, as in Cumberland, Maryland. And in
I didn't know that.
The two ends of the Y were the St. Louis Division and the Chicago Division. And there's a map with all these little things on it.
Interesting.
So Gene and his father went...
Which would refer to the nickel plate, right? You said the two legs of the Y were referred to as...
St. Louis and Chicago Division.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I think is a reference to the nickel plate. But
Possibly.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No, that's okay.
That's just a thought.
My point was going to be that Gene and his father, Floyd, traveled extensively all around the country by rail. They had the money to charter private rail cars and go all around the country. So they were big rail fans. So I think the CNS, points on the CNS were definitely inspired by national railroading. Later they got rid of some of those names and came up with Peachtree Junction and stuff. I've heard the thing about the Lackawanna Sussex branch.
And I'll explain, because there's actually more to it than that. And once again, I'm trying to remember from 30 years ago, but the yard at Centerville was considered to be equivalent to Port Morris. The station at Centerville was considered to be Netcong. The pick pen grade, the 3.5%, was equivalent to the grade going up from Waterloo up to the lake on, I'm trying to think, I'm right at 206, I'm drawing a blank, but and the Y, which, well, we're not actually on the Y, but the Y was over there.
Yeah.
That was considered to be branch fill. And of course, Becker had a dairy that
Yes.
was on the Sussex branch.
Yes.
So, I mean, whether these are perfect analogies, I don't know, but that's, you're relying on my feeble memory, which can't even remember the name of the lake that's midway between Waterloo and Andover.
It's okay.
That's what online or on-screen editing is for.
Yes.
But so Becker, I guess, really, you never got to meet Becker because he came in. I know he visited Phillipsburg, but it was probably
He passed away in
before.
2003.
Yeah. So that would have been before your time,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah. I wish I had. I have so many questions for him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite an amazing story with what he did here, and to what you're talking about in terms of the history. This was located, even though we're in a bucolic spot, except for the highway, but if you go back without the highway here, this was basically, I remember it as a big farm and basically a very rural, almost a rural setting.
Yeah.
I mean, Roseland was probably a very centrally located place back in the 50s and 60s. You know, Essex County, booming population, and people in the summer going to the park, or I should say going to the farm. And
In northern New Jersey, so it, really in a big population center. It's
Yeah.
interesting to think what would have happened if they could have continued to operate the farm. We'll never know, but it's one of those things.
Yeah.
But you know, what you guys are doing is quite amazing, and
Thank you.
I know the story is far from complete because there's still more to come. Okay, we got the whole full crew here. Well, I'll pass the mic along. Introduce yourselves, and basically your, I'll say, the connection to where we are now today. But I'll start with you, Eric.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Eric Morgan-Hune. I'm with the Roseland Historical Society. I'm fairly new to the area, but it's been really interesting to discover this history and this hidden gem in Roseland, and trying to figure out what we as the Historical Society can do to help get some more education out about this place.
I'm Keith Muldowney. I grew up riding the Centerville and Southwestern, so it's been a long time interest of mine. So this is just another piece of the history. So.
And Keith is the reason we have this signal here today.
Keep the mic. Question for you. And maybe any best memories of your experiences as a kid. We're all kids in a sense, in our spirit. But when you were here, when this was an operating railroad, what do you remember about it? Your fondest memory of it.
The railroad was just so unique because it was in a country setting with the farm, with the cows and everything. So it was like a whole package.
Pigs too.
Pigs too, and chocolate milk. So,
Chocolate milk, yes.
but yeah, it was just such a unique experience because, and having ridden other amusement park trains, this was far from an amusement park train.
It was not an amusement
This
park
was
train.
a miniature railroad. And as a miniature railroad, it operated like a miniature railroad. Between the signals, the air brake system on the train, it had it all. And between having the steam locomotive, extra diesels, and 31 cars, it really came across as a real operating railroad.
as you can see, just by looking at the first departure time, 10:23 with the 15:01, 10:38 with the 15:02, and 10:49 with the 15:03. I mean, the trains were only 10 to 15 minutes apart from each other, and they had staged meets along the railroad to maintain the schedule. And that first train was back in time to make another trip a half an hour later So this was like, from what I can gather just by looking at that, this was a high volume, especially on days when patronage was heavy. It was a high volume operation that could not be compromised. It needed to be maintained, the schedule be maintained.
Now, when you would come here, when you were first here, what's a rough time frame of what your first trip would have been?
First trip probably I remember was probably 56, 57. And that's only because there's a photograph of me here. So, and you kind of fill in the memories from the photographs. So, I can actually say that I was possibly here before I was even born. Because I think my parents brought my brother here a couple of months before I was born. So I possibly rode the train before I was born.
Oh, wow. So was this like, I mean, my recollection of coming here was that it was either like around lunchtime or sometime in the afternoon, we'd show up and we'd go into the park in the yard, you go get your tickets, and you'd ride the train and then come back and have the chocolate milk and get the vegetables and all that. But I don't know, maybe it was me, but it was always like a lottery, because if you went up and got online, you never know which engine you were going to get.
Ah.
And I was, it could have been, I remember there being 3 diesels and of course the steam locomotive. The steam locomotive was my favorite, of course, but you didn't necessarily, you got online, you didn't know. It could be anything.
It was a choice, and I guess it's just like going to an amusement park now, getting in a queuing line, and you can look at the people on the line and say, well, maybe I'll wait for the next train. So maybe you just let people go by, and it's probably a learning curve. So.
Well, I was pretty young at the time, so it was whatever happened, I guess. So you remember the railroad as it evolves during the 60s and into the time where this area where we're here gets cut off because of the highway coming through. What do you remember about that, or what can you tell us about that and how that happens with basically the state comes in and they're going to build a highway and this now becomes inaccessible?
Well, it really just came through that the 280 came through and they had to have the land. So,
well, how does that affect the operation of the railroad? I guess is my specific question.
Well, I think Mr. Becker wanted to keep the railroad operating while construction was going on. So he knew he had to build a new route for the railroad, but he kept the railroad operating, even if he had to sever the Y or the loop and utilize the Y going back to pre-1950 using the Y to turn the train at the end. But he had put in a temporary bridge over the new right-of-way. So he was building the new right-of-way while the railroad was still in operation. So if you rode the train in 1967 or so, you saw the new route being built. So he kept the line in operation through that time of construction.
So where we are now, this right-of-way would have gone right into underneath that embankment over here.
Right.
And come around and looped around and then went underneath what is now Route 80 down there further.
Yes.
And Peachtree Junction is somewhere on the other side of the highway.
Yeah. So this is like the furthest point of the railroad, of the loop.
This signal right here is the furthest point out from Centerville.
Yeah.
Which
That
is
way.
approximately 1 mile on the railroad.
Yeah.
And so let's say, talk about steam engines. Let's say you're behind 1501. I remember that there had to be a stop made. It wasn't here. It was closer to the Y, but
on each leg of the Y, so to speak, was their coal and water stop. They did not shovel coal or anything on the locomotive while it was making the run to the loop. They would stop the engine and check the fire, add coal and such for the run back. So you weren't really firing the engine while they were running. So it was just, it was more case that, you didn't have a fireman next to you to take care of the fire. The engineer had to focus on taking care of the train and controlling the brake and that. So he would have to stop and fire the engine at each leg of the Y. It was a coal water stop.
Now the diesels didn't have that problem. They just kept on going.
So the schedule was based around what was operating. So it was a pretty strict schedule, but there were cases where it had to be followed, and you had the passing sidings where the trains would wait for one another to make passes. So with the signals, that's what kept governing the trains to keep everything safe.
They could run 3 trains at once, right?
They could run 3 trains.
Yeah.
So there was actually, I remember there being a telephone out, not here, but somewhere like at the junction?
At the junction there was a telephone box. And at the passing sidings there would have been a telephone box. So I'm not sure how often it got used, but...
the railroad had a telephone line.
But still, that's... there were really so many things about it that, like, how much more could they have done to make it even more real than it was?
Because there were telephone poles and insulators, and carry the wires out so far, and in fact, all the signage that went along with it. That's what makes it, significantly like a real railroad, because there was signage just like you would see on a real railroad. They changed from time to time. Originally, the Peachtree Junction was Cumberland Junction.
We were talking about that. I didn't know that.
And the Pigpen siding was originally Swine Field siding. So, but things changed little by little. But some of the names carried over in some of the paperwork and such. But
it's interesting to note that everybody remembers it as the Fresh Milk Line. Originally, it was the Black Forest route.
Black what?
The Black Forest route.
Really?
In reference to, I guess, the woods out here as a kind of mysterious, enchanted woods.
Well, I remember the chocolate milk. That, I think any kid that rode the line and came and went afterwards to, just get a snack or whatever, you would remember the chocolate milk.
Yeah.
And I'm not a milk drinker, but I love the chocolate milk. It was great. And I remember the switch over to Alderney, because that was in '64, I think it was. Yeah. It takes place where it's sold off now. What do you know what prompted that sale, and what kind of implications that had for the dairy farm?
It was probably just a sign of the times. You had, people going to the stores to get milk. You weren't getting the milk delivered the way it was. So yeah, it was probably just a change of the times and the advent of the automobile. People went to the store to get their milk. So there was probably a writing on the wall. Maybe Becker and family, they decided it was the right time, or ultimately made the right offer. Unfortunately, that had a effect on the Sussex branch of the Lackawanna. So with the plant closing down in Lafayette, Traders Crossing, that was one of the last customers on the Sussex branch.
And we were talking before about, and I don't know if there's anything to this, but I remember, I think I saw this in the file that was at the Roseland Library.
Which I think the Historical Society now has. The library gave you all their files, yeah.
Whether the Centerville Southwestern was in a way modeled after this Sussex branch. Does that make any sense to you? Or is that like
I guess I've seen that written, but I don't have any recollection of where that would have come in from, because and that's why they had Cumberland Junction as the end of the line at the one time in the beginning. So
I mean, it could have been Branchville, but that would have been, But
No, but at the time, and Gene Becker and his dad used to go out and travel by train quite a bit. So they probably just wanted to recreate one of their trips or so, going on the main line and such. So whether, again, yes, it's going to look like the Sussex branch because you're going along and you see cows. So it's going to have that appearance, and you're on a farmland and such. But whether he had any modeling aspects from the Sussex branch, I don't know.
There were a couple of things that he took from the Lackawanna, like the crossing flashers were painted in Lackawanna practice,
For
right?
a while, the flashers were painted black,
With
which
white.
was a Lackawanna practice early on, and then he changed them to white. So, which I think Lackawanna also changed to white. So,
and of course the 1501. I don't know about the numbering, but it was certainly a Pocono.
that's you're going to go down another rabbit hole.
That's an interesting rabbit hole because people say it's a Pocono, but
It is actually a stretched out New York Central Hudson.
Okay, so but that would be a 464.
But
But
what happened was, and this goes in some of the history of the 1501, when Gene Becker and his dad wanted to get a locomotive built. Where did they go? They went and visited Alco,
of course.
and they visited Joseph Ennis, who was VP of Engineering. I believe they went to visit him in New York City and approached them about building a miniature locomotive. And I think at the time, they had visions of Hudsons in their head. Because now you look at 1937, Lionel had just come out with the scale New York Central Hudson. So Hudson was on a lot of people's minds. So I think their first idea was having a Hudson.
Yeah.
Now, as they were already starting to design the railroad, it was pointed out that they had over 3% grade, ruling grade, coming out of the station. And Joseph Ennis, I believe, talked them into that maybe they should do a Northern. So that's how Northern came about. Now, Alco certainly wasn't in any position to build a miniature locomotive. But Joseph Ennis had a connection with Hobart Ayres, who had just retired as president of the H.K. Porter Company in Pittsburgh. He got together with Hobart Ayres, who was a little reluctant at the time, but once he started getting the idea in his head, ended up leasing a shop in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and bringing on a few people to work with him. And that's where the 1501 was constructed, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So
what year is that roughly?
1938 to 1940.
But you look at some of the castings on the 1501, there are details that are just
They're
standard
straight off of New York Central
New York
Hudson.
Central Hudson, like the cast Commonwealth pilot,
Yeah.
the air compressor shrouds, the bonnet over the top of the firebox. It's straight New York Central. Although the Beckers themselves did always refer to it as a Pocono.
As a Pocono. You're in the area. So,
Well, that's where that comes from, because I hadn't heard about the New York Central connection. But of course, the Lackawanna had Hudsons as
they
well.
had Hudsons that were,
But from what you're saying is, and this is not my area of expertise, it didn't look like a Lackawanna Hudson, but it sort of had more attributes of a New York Central Hudson, if that makes any sense.
So that's it. So it's just New York Central Hudson with an extra set of drivers.
Okay. Okay.
So,
I'm going to throw a curve at you about and you can beg off on this, but this has been about the farm assessment. We were talking about this before, where the farm is roughly 1,000 acres before it gets chopped up with Route 280. After 280 comes through, it now becomes, I don't know how many acres it was at that point, 800 and something or whatever. That parcel in 1972 is still under a farm assessment, which is relatively a small amount per acre. And I understand that that gets revoked by the borough of Roseland, and now Gene Becker is presented, or would be presented, with a bill, presumably now, with 800 acres of residential property. I think it was converted to residential zoning.
I think so, yeah.
Correct, which would have been astronomical. Any of that history, what was going on there? Because it's I don't know. I've always wondered about that. What was behind that? And I don't want to say there's something fishy, but it was just something strange about that. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, it certainly seems to have come out of the blue in terms of the change in zoning. Now, I don't know in this specific case what happened, and we don't necessarily have those records, or at least we haven't found them yet at our archive. But if you look in the area throughout the 70s, you had the white flight out of the cities with the Newark riots and things. You also had just general urbanization that's going to push towns and the municipalities to try to build up and kind of accept that transition into suburban highway commuter development. So the impression I have is that it came as a surprise to the Beckers, but that it was a larger trend within North Jersey as you had more of these suburban communities developing.
Now, certainly they're going to see a large increase, no matter what happens, in the tax dollars that they're receiving. Now, I don't know if this is true, but I'm trying to remember now whether Becker originally was approached someone who was talking about possibly building a mall. That was the first. I'm seeing blank stares.
No, I haven't heard that.
I don't know. I don't know where I got this from, but obviously that doesn't happen. But that the borough was upset about that, which is kind of interesting because
Right.
it's kind of hypocritical to take away the farm assessment, and now all of a sudden you're complaining about what's going to be there. But so, how does the business campus then come in?
Again, I'm not sure. The thought of putting in a mall is I hadn't heard that one before, but it wouldn't surprise me.
And I don't know if I don't know where I heard that. I mean, but I'm not saying it's true, but it wouldn't surprise me that might have been considered, at that time. But I don't know if it's true or not.
Yeah, if you think about the time period, that's when all of these malls are going up, Woodbridge and Willowbrook, and
they're going away, but
Rockaway.
That was a big thing.
And so and at the same time, you have the big companies moving out of the cities, trying to build up these corporate campuses. In part because you had most of their workforce moving out of the cities at the same time. So,
and it was very convenient. I mean, which also adds the suspicion because it was at exit 5. Is right over here.
Yeah.
So literally, I mean, you could get off the highway and come to the business campus here.
And this is the kind of stuff you saw whenever the highway came in through a town. Was that look back 100 years prior, the train arrives in the town and you all of a sudden have development. Well, the highway comes into the town and you have a different style of development coming in with big parking lots and parking minimum requirements and everything, because people are now commuting by car instead of by train. So ironically, the highway does kill off the railroad.
Well,
so what remains? You were going to say something though. Go ahead.
Sort of. I mean, the highway kind of killed off this part of the railroad, but it was the business campus really that killed off the major part of the railroad over there.
Question, what remains over there? Obviously we're on part of the right-of-way that still exists, but what vestiges are left if we were to go over to, let's say, the farm, I'll call it the parcel of the farm. Is there anything left there to see that's of the original railroad?
So I think this is the most significant remaining part. It's the longest surviving stretch of right-of-way. But there are a couple of things on the other side. You have Peachtree Junction, still exists. There's dramatic earth cut, and the Y itself is now paved, but that's part of ADP. and they don't like people visiting, snooping around, looking at that stuff.
That's why we're over here.
Yeah, that's why we're over here. The 1968 high bridge from the realignment of the railroad still exists. It's not the original bridge. It's the original abutments and cast into it CNSRR 1968. When they built the office park, they decided to put a new bridge on there. So it's not the original railroad bridge, but it looks like it, basically, and it has the original abutments, so you can see that. I took a GIS course in college, and my final project was actually related to the Centerville Southwestern. So I developed a 3D map of the entire railroad as it was back in the day, which we have all the elevation profiles from the survey map of the railroad, of the elevation diagram. And I was able to compare that with contemporary LiDAR data, which shows the topography of the present day. And a lot of people say that Becker's Farm was totally, the contours of the land were all changed, but what I found was that surprisingly more than you would think is the way it was when the railroad was still there. The plains, where the track went through the plains, it's basically at the same elevation. Pigpen grade is basically still the same, so but there's not much in terms of like right-of-way or surviving artifacts aside from those things.
Well, I imagine the buildings and the parking lots and also kind of throw off your perspective.
Yeah.
Because I got that impression myself. It's like, oh my gosh, they've bulldozed everything and it looks like it's totally different. But what you're saying is it really isn't necessarily.
It's not that different. Horseshoe Curve now hangs 15 feet in the air.
Okay.
If it were there. There's just 15 feet of space underneath it. But most of the railroad, and then there's the long fill, which back in the day was like a 5 foot, 6 foot high fill from the plains to Peachtree Junction. That was scooped out back to the original terrain where it's just kind of the shallow bowl. There's a hickory tree. Back in the day, around 1948, there was a hickory tree planted or sprouted right next to the turntable of the railroad. And it grew into a big hickory tree, and for the entire life of the railroad, this hickory tree stood over the turntable and shaded 1501 each time it was turned. It was right next to the ring rail of the turntable, and that hickory tree still stands today on the business campus.
And there have been photos that have been shared on Facebook of that, a comparison now and then type of thing. Final question, and any thoughts? I mean, I don't know. This is general questions. So I just kind of throw it in your laps. Anything that you want to talk about, or anything about the railroad, or anything about anything? it's sort of like well, I had one question I didn't want to ask, but this was even before that was if you could go back into a time machine. And I know I've thought about this myself. You know, I have a list of the places and things I'd like to do, but this would be one of them. I don't know if you ever have thought about that. You know, if you could go back in the time machine, would you pick a year, or you know, what I don't know. I mean, if it were possible, I assume the answer is yes. I mean,
When anybody, right? So,
yeah,
I think there's a bunch of historians that's opening a can of worms. Of course we'd want to go back, right?
Yeah. If I could go back to any day on the CNS, I'd go in the fall of 1962, because you had the signal system operating already. You had all 4 locomotives, because 1503 had already been built, but 1500 had not left yet already. It was sold from the railroad in 1965, and there's this very narrow period of 5 years when all 4 locomotives are on the railroad. So I would try to catch a busy day in the early 60s when all 3 trains were running, and maybe even an extra train with 1500, just for the busyness.
I got to ride 1500.
Yeah.
And that story. I don't know if you want me to tell that story or not. Here, let me tell the story. And my father had his camera, so I actually have. There's video that exists of this. It's a short train. It's 1500, and with maybe 4 cars tops. We start off. I get on and my mom's riding. My dad has the camera. We start off from the station and climb up Pigpen grade, and we don't make it. We make it past the grade crossing, but it's a no-go. So we stall. We have to go pull back, So they start to realize, okay, we got to have a running jump here. So the train is backed into the yard. I don't remember how far we went into the yard, but I don't think it was that far. We take another run for it. We make it farther up the hill. We still don't make it. We stall. Back we go. This time, all I remember is, because I was like maybe 2 cars in, I guess, from the back of the train. We back up. There was a building. You probably know what I'm talking about. There was a building at the very end of track. We literally, I mean, I'm from here to our photographer from that building at the end of track, and they just let it rip. I'm sure I don't know what the speed limit through the station was. I'm a little kid, but I remember, and we made it. We made it up to the top of the hill, amazingly enough. But
It's a great story.
yeah. But any other thoughts? I mean,
Keith?
No, I'm pretty well. I probably said more than I should have. But
did you ever? Yeah, I guess you didn't get a chance to ever ride it, did you?
No. I was born in '92, so
you're
long after it was gone, and I grew up in Morris Township. So finding out about the railroad has been really interesting when we moved here. And I'll just say, to kind of wrap up my own thoughts about it, I think it's great that there's a bunch of locals and not so local people who have taken an interest in this and have preserved so much of the material culture left behind from it, because it's coming to Roseland, learning about the history here. I was really disappointed when I learned that there was this railroad that is now gone, and I'd love to see some of that come back and do something at the Historical Society to help commemorate this the history and heritage here. So,
and I don't think there would be this level of interest if it hadn't been something that was really something great.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's hyperbole, because I think it was something that was really great.
Yeah.
And the fact that it went away for a period of time, yes, but yeah, but it really does show that you need dedicated people who really, really love, that really want to not only preserve this, but to operate it again. And that's what's happening. That's the amazing part of this. And it is an amazing story. And the final chapter is yet to be written. I mean, we're still going.
if I just add, one of the most unique things, and we've looked at full-size railroad history and such, for a miniature railroad, almost everything exists from the original railroad. So all the engines exist, all the cars exist, except that stuff that was put out of service when the railroad's operation. But everything exists.
Yes. How many railroads can you claim the whole roster still exists?
I take it that I know that the station building or the ticket office still exists.
Yeah.
What happened to the overhang and the station and all that?
That all got removed.
That was removed.
That probably couldn't be saved.
Okay.
Because that was a whole structure on posts, on lolly columns, that you couldn't move that. So the station they could move. And
Where is the station?
in Phillipsburg.
In Phillipsburg, yep. You mentioned about it's amazing that so many people are still interested in this railroad, and the amount of interest there is, it must have been great. It really was. I mean, it was world famous. The number of journals and publications this railroad was featured in over the years. Becker said that people came from Switzerland, Brazil, Britain, just to see this railroad. It was an incredible, world famous miniature railroad.
And I take it for granted that I was able to ride it. And I'll be the first one to admit I was kind of, and of course maybe at that age, I was like 12 at the time, when the conversion to where they were running to Paradise Valley occurred. And I was disappointed at that, because I always felt that this original ride was the ride. And after that happened, it was almost like, But I think, also probably had to do with the age I was at. It's like 12 years old, your interest might start to change at that point.
Some of the later pictures suggest that after he lost the property and had to create the second loop that slightly shortened the train ride, or as he felt that it cheapened the train ride a little bit, that the patronage began to fall off a little bit, that more of the trains were going out half empty than they were back in the initial stages when the railroad was, all the trains were going out full all the time.
Now, I gotta correct you on one thing you was talking about. When he realigned the railroad,
Yes.
it was actually longer than the original alignment.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Point, but yeah, I mean, if it were possible to go back into a time machine and come back to someplace, yeah, this would be one. This will be on my list. Be very, very close to the top of the list, quite frankly. Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen. You've really been not only just helpful, but you've been very cooperative and very interesting as well. So I want to thank you.
Do you want to see Wet Weather Creek before we leave here?
That was pretty cool.
Wet Weather Creek.
Yeah, you were talking about bridges before. And
Yes,
you
yes.
got to see Wet Weather Creek while you're here.
Okay.
It's a short one.
Oh, I mean, you can. Oh, we can do. I mean, not from here.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Why don't we unplug the signal?
So where are we right now?
We are at Wet Weather Creek, which was a culvert built on the loop in 1950.
So in relation to where we were standing before, we're about, let's say, how far around the loop?
About a quarter of the way around from where we were, I'd say. The signals are really at the center of the loop. This is about halfway between that center and Peachtree Junction.
So was there any other signal on the loop other than the one that we were?
At the Y at the junction, there were numerous signals that blocked the different tracks of the Y. So there were numerous signals at the Y.
But in terms of actually on the loop itself,
It was just the two signals at the side that guarded each side of the loop.
okay. Now this here, what was here at one time? Because it's a little bit difficult to visualize with it being. It looks
we
like
can
it's
send you a picture of what it was. There's a good picture of the culvert.
Okay.
But it was just a fieldstone and mortar culvert to carry a small little tributary of, I think this connects to Fullerton's Brook, but it's called Wet Weather Creek. That's what Becker called it.
We would have been probably about this high with the stonework and a metal culvert below.
So the track would have been back there, behind you.
The track would have been probably about this elevation.
Okay. And back in the day, we were just talking about this, that because of Route 280, it probably has changed to how the drainage is in this spot, and either there's more water or less water or whatever, but this wasn't always wet, I guess is my...
Well, it's called Wet Weather Creek, so the assumption is it was dry, not during wet weather.
That makes sense. Were there actually any peach trees at Peachtree Junction?
That's a good question.
That's a good question, yeah.
I've always wondered that.
That's a question for somebody older than me.
I don't even know where that came from, because it was originally Cumberland Junction, but I always wondered about that because peach trees, well, I don't know.
There may have been an orchard behind here, so because the farmland went on for a while, but there was the peach blight in the early 1900s or late 1800s.
That's right, yes.
So that could have been something that was wiped out at one time. So
Interesting.
something for the history books to look up. So.
Yeah. And the farm goes all the way back to 1850, so I'm sure there was an orchard.
So not necessarily at the time of the railroad, but at some previous time,
Yeah.
there might have been. Well, that makes sense. I mean, I remember going through on the train, it being kind of like this. I mean, granted, it's even more overgrown, and there's trees over the right of way and so forth. But it was kind of like this in many ways. They made it cleared back, I presume, so that there was overhang and so forth. It wasn't like they cleared back all the way, 30, 40 feet in each direction. It was just enough to keep the right of way clear. But being back here, other than Route 280, I don't know. When I was walking up here and then it's like, no, it kind of looks like it. From what I recollect, all those years ago.
People always mention that it was dark and shady. I think what Keith and I were talking about, we think some of the big trees may have fallen down, so there may be more light than it was at the time. But
well, in the video, it's mentioned that it was quite a bit cooler, especially on a very warm or hot day. It was much cooler as you did the loop. That in here it would have been, because there's almost no sun. It was, a break from the heat.
It was quite a bit different than the rest of the run, because so much of the rest of the run was through the fields, the cornfields on each side, so there wasn't a lot of shade on the rest of the trip. So this was probably refreshing to get to the end and go through the shade.
What I'm wondering about the people who actually worked, and especially like a steam locomotive. You're sitting, it's 92 degrees, and you're sitting behind a steam locomotive. Was that a kind of a grueling type of job?
There's nothing like it. There's nothing like it.
Well, I'm talking about it in terms of, I would imagine it would have been fun, but I'm just thinking, was it hot behind that?
You're still got to get heat, but you're moving. If you're moving, you're getting the breeze. So it's if you're going to sit and you're going to be working with it, and you're not confined in the cab like a real locomotive. So
okay, right, that's right, true.
although when it rained, if it rained and they were all the way out here, they had to go back in the pouring rain, and there were no roofs on those cars.
The ticket actually said, if it rains, you will get wet.
Okay.
Which begs the question, obviously that must have happened.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid waiting in the station where it was raining, and they wouldn't let any of the trains leave. I mean, I remember it was coming down in buckets, but it was like one of those things, well, we got to go home because it doesn't look like it's going to break. But that what you're saying is that happened when you're out there. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Although, well, I guess back in the day, of course, they didn't have satellite imagery and all the stuff that today we'd know, in 15 minutes it's going to rain, and we'd stop the train, that type of thing. Didn't exist, Just look at the sky, and it was your best guess, I guess.
You're using the farmer's almanac on a farm. So.
What do they do with all the animals? Because my impression is that later years that there's not much in the way. Are there any animals when we get towards the end of the?
There were some animals still on the farm towards the end. He had, I guess, a few cows and some pigs, but far down from when it was a working farm. But he was still keeping some animals on the farm. So.
Now I remember vegetables, and I'm trying to remember all the vegetables that they sold. I remember the carrots because I was a big carrot eater. Any kind of recollection of what?
Well, everybody talks about the corn. I don't remember getting corn from there, but from other people we've talked to, they said it was some of the best corn that they would get.
Farm and getting off the train and picking up, chocolate milk, dairy products, cottage cheese, and the last two times I talked to Pauline Becker on the phone, she said that the summertime they would have green beans, corn, and other vegetables available after they got off the train.
And there were no pesticides or no fertilizer or something like that. They were very clear about.
I think they were very clear on what some of the signage. There's some signs of the vegetable stand that we've been trying to decipher some of the wording on some of the signs. But,
well, they would have been ahead of their time if that were the case, because now that's I guess it's definition of organic and such. But back in the day, back in the day, I don't know if there was as much concern, because obviously if you use pesticides, you're more likely to have a larger harvest, but at the risk of course. Well, I used to eat the carrots raw. I don't remember what else they had other. I know there was more than that, because I remember we used to get this bag, and my parents would buy a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I'm sure some of it ended up in, at home, but I was in the back seat munching away at stuff as we were going home. After the chocolate milk, of course.
Chocolate milk.
It was great. I don't know how to. I've tried other chocolate milks since, and it just, I don't know, maybe it's just you get something in your head, and it maybe you just think there's nothing that's going to beat it no matter what, but it was good. I mean, it really was good. But everyone seems to rave about it, so it's sort of like we all have the same opinion of it going back. But once again, you can, in a sense, idealize something, but I don't know. What does the photographer think? Why'd you come in here for a moment? My voice is going.
As you're choking, I'm choking, we're all choking.
The reason why I ask is you had heard about this place.
So the irony is, when you called me, it was kind of funny because my mom used to take me to Becker's Farm. Okay, so I'm a little younger than you, but I had to be single digits, so it was a very faint memory. But what was even more ironic is my first job out of college was a small company over here at 85 Livingston Ave, and that's on the Becker Farm property. And I kind of showed up and I was like, I've been here before. I don't know when. And my mom was still alive then, and she told me the stories of, she used to bring me here for, I was probably 2 or 3. I was born in '68, so how old could I be, right? I mean, it had to be very young, and I remember it, and my dad, years after that, when I was growing up, used to take me to the train yards in Linden, and to, Newark Airport's not that glorious now that you talk about it, but when you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it's amazing to see the machinery. So that's my story of when you asked me to come here and help you film this. I was like, that's a sign. I'm meant to do that. So, yep.
It's an interesting point as to how many kids in northern New Jersey in that era were actually here over time. On any given day, I don't know what they would normally have, but I imagine many of these people, or the kids and the families and such, were customers of Becker, but I'm sure there must have been others who were not customers. We were customers in South Orange, I know that. Remember the milkman delivering milk and such, but that ended at some point. But I imagine that was part of it. Was this like, in a sense, almost like a I don't know what to call it, a sort of a not advertising per se.
It became an attraction. I mean, after the farm, they were trying to go to an attraction, and there was actually a little book published during the 60s or so. I think it's called Away We Go, and it was local attractions in New Jersey. And this is before the internet or anything like that, so you look up these things. And the Centerville Southwestern was listed in that book. I haven't found a copy of that book again yet, but sometime I'll find one. So.
It was in Day Trips of New Jersey, too, I think published in 1962. I was looking at a copy of that in Roseland. It's just a quick blurb. Modern dairy farm and railroad operation, 2 for the price of 1 sort of thing.
Well, if people from Switzerland and around the globe had heard about this, you would think that it would have been at least well known in northern New Jersey. But I know we knew about it, but and it's interesting. Where were you living at that point?
So I grew up in Clifton, and so we had smaller, they were not dairy farms, but Ridgefield farms, and a couple different places where there were corn mazes, and it would be a seasonal thing. You get your Christmas trees from there, you do the corn maze, you get your mums, you get your milk and your eggs. Eggs was a big thing. We used to get local eggs there because Yeah, I mean, they're always better no matter where you get them. That's not pasteurized and put through the process. But
Fresh, yeah.
yeah, so it's a North Jersey thing, the Garden State. It was, it doesn't matter if we went horseback riding up on Garrett Mountain, when you get older, or you went to the farm to get your corn to hang on the front door for, you get your pumpkins there. And like I said, I was too young to really remember more than that. Wow, that's a really cool train, and, remember it. But yeah, no, it's a North Jersey thing.
What did they do during the off season with the railroad? I know I've seen video of them actually running the trains with snow up to here and such. Did it go into mothballs typically, or did they actually ever take it out and run the trains around?
Probably the snow operation was just early on what you saw in the video, because it was a new thing and they were using it to. I think in the video they're conveying hay out to some of the cows out of the pasture, so they're trying to use that as an excuse to clear the railroad. So probably, they get the farm hands out to clear the railroad so they can go feed the cows. So, but an interesting aspect for ridership, going back just before they opened to the public, they opened the railroad up to school groups, and they would bring school groups in. Well, in doing that, and this is now using the railroad as a salesman point of view, they would have the kids fill out an index card, name and address. They'd hand it over to their salesman. The salesman would go out and visit the homes and get them on the milk route. So, utilizing, we're going to go to the school groups, but now we're also going to try to find a way to benefit from that. So that was one of the aspects of first, and then they opened to the public, because that was right before they opened to the public. They were doing school groups.
I came here in third grade. My teacher, this is probably the best thing she ever did, because that's a long story. Miss Jensen and I were not, we didn't get along, but our school trip for the third grade that year was to, and it was on a Wednesday. And it must have been, I guess it must have been like in June or something, because it obviously the railroad didn't operate.
It was usually from Memorial Day. Earlier on, they ran to October, but towards the end it was Labor Day. Or I think, Labor Day was the last day of operation. It might have been Columbus Day in the fall. So I have to go back and check the schedules. But they would really run from Memorial Day to probably Columbus Day or so, around this time.
I'd imagine that the ridership might have dropped, or they must have figured that probably, for whatever reason, it made sense just to make it more or less a summer operation.
I think that Becker's idea to run the train the way it is was probably really good, because there's a lot of clean fun, a lot of cheap, clean fun, and to be able to go out onto a farm and smell the pigs and see the cattle and look at the foliage and the hills and knolls that surrounded the track was probably a really nice way to take the family on a Saturday afternoon. He did not run on Sunday. He ran on Saturdays, and then in the summer he ran on Wednesdays. So he had 2 days a week that he ran the train, but he always respected the Lord's Day on Sunday.
Yeah, but you have to wonder how many things we don't know about that just weren't recorded. Because when you have a miniature railroad at your disposal, I could think of cool things to do with it, like going out for a Christmas run, or going out on nighttime runs. They had headlights and all the power.
Yeah, I wonder, did they ever do that? Do you know of any? Did they ever go out at night?
No, because I do remember asking Gene and Pauline. I go, well, do you ever just take the train out for a joyride? And they said no.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
That's the official answer, but I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure they had to do testing now and then.
They needed an excuse usually to do anything.
Or when they went out for the first run, did they actually have I'll call it like a test run or something in the first thing in the morning, or?
Well, the first train that would go out, and this is after they had the signal system up, they actually had a weighted car that had grinding stones or light grinding stones, and they'd run that out around the track to clean off the surface rust from the track so the signals would work. So there's a little weighted car, it's out of Phillipsburg somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere.
And they'd put lead weights on it, and they'd drag that around in the first train. So that would clean the top of the track off so the signals would work.
Oh, but that wasn't necessary to inspect the track.
Well, I think that was part of it also.
Unlocking the switches.
Unlocking the switches, make sure there's no trees falling on the right of way.
Now there was vandalism. I saw it in the chronology. There was vandalism. I can't remember the exact year. I want to say it was either
mid-60s or so. There was some signals that are broken
out here someplace.
out on the at the junction.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that was the only. From the photographs, that's the only pictures I saw of damage. Those are photographs that Gene Becker had taken.
Okay. So anything else you guys can think of?
Well, you mentioned the rain, and I was going to say all the locomotives were equipped with sanders, functioning air sanders. So, which is just another instance of how meticulous and detailed and realistic everything was.
Now, they wouldn't have needed that going up the steep grade because they obviously wouldn't have left the station if it were heavy rain. But I guess there were places where, in theory, I don't know if there was much of a heavy gradients anywhere else on the railroad.
Well, Pigpen grade going up from Centerville was 3.5%, but the backside was a 2% grade, which is still pretty darn steep. The entire railroad was grades and curves.
So they theoretically they could have used the sand from time to time. This is kind of amazing, as you think about there was no detail that was left, unaddressed.
There's a similar railroad down in something village down middle Jersey, Peddler's Village. They have a electric version of an engine that they take the people around. I've seen that down there shopping.
Well, there's several. Smithville Village has a train in their area. I think that might just
Maybe
go
that's
in
what it's called. Yeah.
the CP Huntington or so. Which is like Total Back Zoo and such. They're all the CP Huntingtons, which I guess are either gas or electric or something else. So, there's a number of miniature railroads.
Yeah, I'm thinking like Wild West City. It's right by me. Over in Hope. Make believe.
They have a chance. CP Huntington.
But they do. Okay.
Yeah.
The white hats. The white engineer hats seem to be popular on the Centerville and Southwestern. Not hickory striped, just pure white. If you look at a lot of the photos.
Was that sort of like the Phoebe Snow type of thing, where you
it's probably a carryover from what they saw in the railroads, or possibly because of the dairy.
What did they burn coke, or what did they burn in the steam locomotive?
It was a soft coal that they used.
A soft coal.
And it was actually probably the same coal that they used in the dairy, because the dairy had a steam engine back in the days that the dairy was operating, and that was way far at the end of the track, or even beyond the end of the track and behind the dairy building.
Yeah, that was part of the experience, the aroma or the coal smoke smell, that type of thing.
The polka dot hat, for a brief time in the early 70s, I was involved with the High Iron Company. And we wore, Ross Rollins Company, we wore the red and white polka dot hats. So,
what did you do for that? I know this is not, relevant to the Centerville and Southwestern, but what did you do for High Iron?
Served on the locomotive crew for a brief time. So.
Wow.
Actually rode the 759 over the cutoff.
You okay? You got me going now.
Day, right?
No. Wait a minute. we can pull this this little snippet off into another video. Now, 759. You're talking about going westbound or eastbound on the cutoff, or because some of these were like circle trips, were they not? Or
the circle trips would have gone from Hoboken to Binghamton via the Erie and back on the Lackawanna to Hoboken. So, and that trip, the one trip I did with that was probably May of '73. And that was with the 302, which was the 2102 disguised as the Delaware and Hudson locomotive. So, and then we did a brief trip in July of '73, and we brought the 759 back down from Steamtown and ran a introduction to the Freedom Train with the 759, and that ran just from Hoboken to Scranton in the back. So.
One of these trips, and I don't know if there's any of the ones you were involved with, one of them stalls at Devil's Hole.
Devil's Hole, yeah.
Is that one of your trips, or
that was the trip I was on? Yeah. So.
What happened there? I mean, I know what happens, but I mean,
yeah. There's numerous stories out there, so that's a good one for Ross Rowland to tell you. So.
Well, I haven't spoken to Ross since well, it's been a while, but it was actually since. Well, probably you would have known this gentleman, John Williver.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it was at his funeral that I remember talking to the last time I've seen Ross. But these trains, if I recall correctly, this is before my time. Well, it's not before my time, but I wasn't in any way. I didn't ride them, I didn't see them, and all. You know, so they occurred without my knowledge, basically. But these were typically long trains, were they not, if I recall? Or
yeah, usually on a 17 to 20 car train.
So you were basically pushing like 759, for example, to its limit in terms of like going over the Pocono Mountains. And so, hence the probably the reason why it doesn't quite make it over. But that's quite. I didn't know that. What exactly did you do though? You said you worked on the
service the engine, hustled. It was like I was young at the time. So
but when the trip was taking place, where were you located?
Usually right in the car, right behind the engine, and we'd be off at service stops and such. So
okay.
Greasing,
did you know
putting
this?
water in the tank.
Yeah. Oh, you did know that. Very interesting. Okay. Oh.
And note on the polka dot hat, there is pictures of Gene Becker wearing a red-white polka dot hat. So
okay.
One of the other reasons I wore it today, because I figured,
well, it was like I've really run out of things to ask, and then I said, well, let me ask you about your hats. And it's interesting now we've it brings up about an interesting side story. That's very interesting. Wow. I think I've exhausted these guys. I've exhausted myself. I've exhausted my voice.
I'll just mention about my uniform.
Okay, we'll start. Okay, go ahead.
This is what the guys running the diesels would wear at the tail end in the 60s and early 70s. So I modeled this off of Bob Bennington and his son Tom Bennington, who he helped me out picking the color. This is Air Force blue. And Bob always wore this. He had the CNS patch on the shoulder, which I need to get.
Where's your CNS patch?
I don't have a CNS patch. I need to get one. I need to get a replica made. But they wouldn't have this hat. They'd have the white hat. This is just my hat.
Am I misremembering, or did Bob smoke a pipe?
I think he did.
I kind of remember.
I think all of them smoked a pipe.
I kind of remember the pipe was like a standard. I don't even know if they were smoking or if it was just there, but I kind of remember as a kid, and there'd be a pipe there someplace. Okay.
All righty.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So here we are at the high bridge that went over Fullerton Brook, or Black Rock Brook, that was built in 1968 as part of the line, the new line that bypassed Peachtree Junction, came all the way and looped around to here, went across, and I'm looking at a map here, it went across, recrossed on a culvert, not a bridge. So this was built in 1968, first used for the Centerville and Southwestern operation in 1969. They spent $500,000 for extra trackage that was only used in 1969, 70, 71, and 72. And after that, no more. One thing I should point out, and which I haven't mentioned so far, is that in many ways the Centerville and Southwestern was unique. There's no doubt about that, but it was unique in terms of the gauge of the operation. In other words, the distance between the tracks. Originally, Gene Becker had thought about doing a 1.5 basically scale, which is basically 1.5 inches of a 12-inch scale. They eventually went to a 2-inch scale, which means that the track and the locomotives and cars and such were 1/6 of the actual size of locomotives. So the 1501, for example, if you multiply by a factor of 6 its size, you would have a full-size Pocono steam locomotive. And I believe off the top of my head that the actual gauge, in other words, the distance between the two tracks, was 9 7/8 inches, I believe, off the top of my head. There is no other railroad in existence on the planet that is that gauge. So in 1972, this is the end for here in Roseland. As I mentioned, everything but the 1501, which will go to Michigan, will end up at Thompson Park in Lincroft, New Jersey, in Middlesex County. It's not too far from the Garden State Arts Center, as a matter of fact. And it'll be there for 20 years until it'll go to Phillipsburg, which is where we're going to pick this up, because we're going to talk to folks down and actually get to ride the same railroad, the same, the cars, the same rolling stock behind the same locomotives as operated here, just in a different place. And we'll talk about what their plans are down there, because they're expanding, or hope to expand their operation down there, which has been there now for 30 years almost. And so they're really starting from, not from scratch, because they've done quite a bit, but that's 44A, and I'll explain why I put the A in there instead of like part 45. But so it's sad. I mean, there's no doubt, and I'm sure the people who work in this business campus, for the most part, have no clue that this bridge here was originally for a railroad, a miniature railroad. But that's up for us to actually remind people that was here, that this was a remarkable operation, which through heroic efforts, Gene Becker tried to keep going, and unfortunately circumstances conspired against him. And we'll talk about that maybe a little bit more, but that's basically the gist of what happens here in Roseland. But the story continues. So I'm glad that you were able to join us in part 44. Certainly look forward to when we go to Phillipsburg and the Centerville Southwestern operation down there in part 44A on the Lackawanna cutoff. It followed the pathway across the, I guess it's safe. this is it. And the CNS, Centerville and Southwestern logo plus 1968 are still there. So there's proof that this railroad has longevity. Now, how many years later would that be? 57 years later, I guess that would be right now, that after this was built. Still here. And once again, I doubt that anyone who works here knows the significance of this particular bridge. I don't think you could bring a train over this right now.